to the Lecter dinner party. That's right, we're going to talk about 1991 Silence of the Lambs, one of my favorite movies of all time, and one of the first movies I bought when I started collecting horror movies almost 10 years ago. It's always been in my top 5 since I've watched it, and I've watched it a lot. We're looking at a couple hundred times probably, no, not even lying. Because in my opinion, this movie is perfect in every way. If you haven't seen this movie, I don't know if you have or have not, but there's also a movie that's called Seven that is kind of similar. They're both psychological thriller movies, and they're both heavily based on criminal profiling, which is what they do in Criminal Minds. So if you're not familiar with Silence of the Lambs, think about Criminal Minds, but a lot darker. This movie was released in 1991 on Valentine's Day, and it revolves around a young FBI trainee, Clarice Starling, aka Jodie Foster, and her superior, the head of the department, Jack Crawford, asks Clarice Starling to go talk to Hannibal Lecter, who is a cannibal, but he used to be a psychiatrist, and he ate his victims. He's very, very elegant, well-mannered, and he's not really a good guy or a bad guy. He plays on the line. So that's why this movie also is super cool. You don't really know where he stands. So in a way, he teases Clarice throughout the movie, but he's not really teasing her as he's testing her and he's teaching her. Now, I can't give you too much detail about Hannibal Lecter and his story and his backstory because that's not really talked about until Red Dragon, which is the prequel to this movie. So all the events that lead up to Silence of the Lambs. So you don't really know much except what they mention in the movie, which is enough for you to, piece it together and you can go. Jack Crawford and his team are trying to hunt down the serial killer known as Buffalo Bill. Okay, well, long story short, in a way, Clarice Starling and Hannibal Lecter are almost a team in a way. He helps the FBI, and they are supposed to help him. Wink, wink. If you've watched the movie, you know what happens. The sole purpose of the plot is the interaction between Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster. Those are your main focal points in this movie. You have your side characters who help just, not make it so bland. They're there to help build the story. But the interactions between those two is pretty much the entire movie. You don't have a lot of interaction with Buffalo Bill, which I think is a good thing. You don't want a lot of exposure of the main villain. Not main villain, but he's the protagonist that they're going after. Or antagonist, I can't remember. Whatever. You don't want him to be on screen a lot because you're not going to necessarily fear him if you're exposed to him for too long. So they did a really good job at keeping him, we'll say, behind the scenes. Now, the scenes that you do see with Buffalo Bill are extremely important. I mean, it definitely shows his switch. He can act completely crazy, but he answers the door to talk to Clarice. Very well-mannered. You would never know. Which adds another layer of why this movie should scare you. I want to talk about some of the points with each character, aka the only two that I'm really going to talk about, which is Clarice Starling, aka Jodie Foster, and Hannibal Lecter, aka Anthony Hopkins. So, Clarice Starling is my ideal template for how a female should be portrayed in a horror type of situation. That situation. She is strong, she's smart, but she's also vulnerable, and they play on that as well. it's okay to be vulnerable, but you don't want to be overly vulnerable, because then you're not going to fit the part that you're there to be. You're not going to serve that purpose. And if she was built in this movie to be weak in any way, that would affect everything with the movie. It didn't matter how hard Anthony Hopkins acted, it's still, the dynamic would be off. So, and especially because there's only two main characters holding up a movie, pretty much. Like, this is a whole film being held up by two actors. That's something to think about. So the dedication that they had, and even the conversations and dialogue in the movie, like that, had to have been a strain on both of them, the toll that it would have taken. And if you've seen this movie, you definitely understand, and that's why, like, for example, my favorite scene in this movie is the quid pro quo scene. If you've watched the movie, you'll understand. If you haven't, it is the main dialogue between Clarice and Lecter. Like, that's the meat of the climax of the movie, and that's where you hear the story of the lambs, and that's where the Silence of the Lambs comes from. And that scene is amazing. It is perfect, and that scene sums up the entire movie. And then you have Anthony Hopkins. He did a phenomenal job, even down to the eye contact he made. He deliberately tried not to blink. He wore white on purpose because he wanted to play on the fears of people being afraid of dentists and doctors. So he associated that with wearing all white. That's why in most of the scenes he is in all white. So, I mean, just those little details that mean a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. I mean, when you see someone in all white with slick back hair, what's the first thing you're going to think of? Hannibal Lecter. Buffalo Bill, his character was important to build the story. I think he was okay. I mean, the actor, you're not really there with him enough to develop a sense of, oh, he was a bad actor or he was good. I mean, he was there. I don't know if he's played in anything else that I can remember off the top of my head. It wasn't always going to be Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster. The original choices were Sean Connery and Michelle Pfeiffer. Can you imagine just hearing Lecter, Hannibal Lecter? I'm very glad that that was not the choices made. And I think that this movie is forever going to be etched in history as one of the greatest movies of all time. And well, I mean, it has the awards to show. So that's just my thoughts, all good thoughts, of 1991 Silence of the Lambs.